My lady walked over a mat in the.
Did we lose Bill? Uh-oh, poor connection.
What made you want to do it?
Well, my mom presented the idea to me, and she said that I could be one of the first.
I think we just lost Ty. Ty, I think we have you back. So I'll ask the question again. What made you want to be a part of this trial?
And John, in the early days of this investigation, what stands out to you the most?
1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 4 5.
We can hear you, John.
So let's see if we can give Teresa a call.
Hello.
Teresa, you're upside down, girl. Will you flip your phone upside down?
We can't see you.
This way. One more click.
One more.
One more. Yes! That's right. You got it.
That's really funny. It's one of the workplace hazards that have come with the pandemic, especially for those of us on TV, and today especially. And it ties into a big question surrounding life after COVID, how companies are managing the return to the office. A new Boston College article entitled "The Hybrid Workplace Probably Won't Last" suggests that might not be a good idea. In it, behavioral scientist Jon Levy writes in part, as distance increases, teams need higher levels of trust to function. And trust is traditionally created through little actions that are more fluid in person. The risk is that over the long run, those who are in person will bond more strongly than those who are at a distance. Those in the office will feel a much greater sense of belonging, and those who aren't will often be seen as outsiders or an afterthought. Given all this, is it possible to have a well-functioning workforce that is largely but not entirely remote and only occasionally comes together? Only with a great deal of effort. And John joins us now. He's also the author of the new book, You're Invited, The Art and Science of Cultivating Influence. Also with us, Professor of History at Tulane University, Walter Isaacson, and NBC's Casey Hunt is back with us as all. So, Jon Levy, let's develop upon the point that you made that I read. And look at the workplace as it stands right now, where there's, first of all, this confusion about coming back. Different companies are trying to make different announcements. There's an effort to bring people back in, and yet a reticence to come back in. What do you think the consequences of a not complete return may be?
So I think that the situation's really complicated. First of all, when we look at the greatest predictors of human longevity, it's close social ties and social integration, feeling like we're connected. If you look at the predictors of company stock value, employee sick days, and profitability, it's the level of trust. And for most teams, not all, but for most, being distanced the way they have been has eroded trust. And especially new employees coming onto the team don't feel a connection. So it just makes it really hard to manage. And it also makes it really hard for people to feel connected to their work.
Hey, John, it's Willie Geitz. Good to have you on. This is such an interesting and important piece, I think, for people thinking about coming back to the workplace and what it's going to look like after all of this. You write specifically about one piece that I've been concerned about, which is for people to be recognized, people who may not yet be established at their company. The place you do that, as a lot of us learn coming up in our businesses, is that you do it in a meeting, or you do it, next to your boss or working with your colleagues. That's how you build your reputation. It's how you build your work ethic. And it has real world implications for promotions and bonuses and everything else.
Yeah, it's super interesting because it's not just when you're building your career, but it also has very serious implications on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a recent study by Future Forward found that only 3% of African-American knowledge workers want to return full-time. Their white counterparts was 21%. So now we find ourselves in a situation where if people prefer to stay at home and are given that option, then we might find ourselves with an even less diverse office. And people who are marginalized staying home and seeing less rates of promotion or recognition. And this has huge societal impacts.
So, Walter Isaacson, I'd love for you to comment on this moment in history, and then, of course, if you have a question for the author.
I certainly have a question for Jon because, you know, Steve Jobs was very much against people telecommuting in or doing distance meetings. He built the Pixar headquarters, designed the new Apple headquarters, so there would be serendipitous encounters. People would have to go through the atrium to get to a screening room, a bathroom, even to get something to eat, because he said when people bumped into each other, people had these random encounters. They'd say, what are you working on? What are you doing? And sparks would fly. So I was going to ask Jon, not just in terms of onboarding people and forming a culture, but in having this notion of creativity be from sparks flying, from serendipitous encounters. How important is that to the workplace?
I love that you asked this, and thank you for pointing this out. If you look in general, the organizations that have the most cross-divisional pollination, meaning people from different divisions know each other, maybe even switch divisions, and come in contact with each other, tend to do the best. And if what we're limited to is only the people that we happen to be on Zoom meetings with, it's going to really limit any interactions like these. The fact is, out of sight, out of mind. And for us to have inspiration and see opportunities, we need to, as you said, pollinize across a company.
You know, I think that's true also in high school and in colleges. I'm here in New Orleans the past 3 days. We've had graduation in person for Tulane and all my students, but a lot of them spent the past year mainly interacting on Zoom or in a virtual format, even though the campus was open. The past 3 or 4 days have been filled with crawfish boils. You go to the lobby of the Windsor Court Hotel, everybody's there with their parents, and they're actually meeting people, and sometimes for the first time, that they haven't, you know, gotten to know. And that ability to collaborate, to be collegial, is something we try to teach in college, and it's been difficult teaching it in an online environment, which is why I think you were using this week to at least try to get people together again. I think, I'd be interested in your thoughts on teaching collaboration and collegiality in an era of Zoom meetings.
So this is so interesting to me because it fundamentally is really critical during those college years, and also as people are entering the workforce, to be exposed to as many different types of people as possible. If you're sitting in a Zoom class and everybody has their camera off, there's no requirement to interact or even see that other people exist. There's this characteristic of human beings called the mere exposure effect, that just being exposed to something more often causes us to like it more. And so even if we aren't necessarily interacting with every person, just the fact that we're exposed to them or around them actually allows us to see new perspectives and be affected by them. And I think what you're pointing to is really critical, because these events like you're talking, the barbecues and so on, demonstrate that fundamentally what's important to people is to connect and experience a sense of belonging. It's that same thing that predicts human longevity or company stock value.
Casey Hunt is with us, and she has a question.
So, Jon, not to play devil's advocate here, but you mentioned at the top that people's relationships determine their longevity. And while I completely understand how that's true in the workplace, I think it's also true in family life. And one of the things that we found during this pandemic are a lot of workers are looking around and saying, you know what, my family life perhaps is richer. Perhaps I've grown more in those relationships with the opportunity to be more flexible in work, especially for a lot of younger workers who've come up in an era where you don't feel like you go to work for one company and then they're going to help you take care of your family in exchange for the rest of your life. I mean, we've entered a different era here. So I think my question for you is, what should companies be doing to try to take that on? What can companies do to create a culture, on the one hand, that also allows more flexibility for their workers? How can they take responsibility for this in a way that makes all of us better?
So I think it's really important to recognize that you can have certain aspects of hybrid work really well, but we need to start training people for it now. And that means that if people are going to be staying at home to spend, let's say, more time with their family, that we need to train managers to develop greater levels of trust and how to manage at distance so that we don't just add countless hours of meetings that would have otherwise been our commute. The other aspect of it is that we need to also give people a sense of belonging if they're at a distance so that they don't feel like second-class employees and are thereby overlooked or ignored. And so there's a whole lot that companies can do in terms of that. My concern in general is that companies will be either overwhelmed or lazy about these practices. As far as spending time with family, I'm a huge believer that that's really critical and important. But for the most part, although some people have experienced a general closeness throughout the day, for many, it's been incredibly stressful trying to juggle both taking care of their kids and all of their office responsibilities with longer work hours. And so the idea that in general, most of us are closer to our family during those work hours, I'm not sure that's accurate. But I do think it's an excellent point for some people.